Hi, I'm Michael. Welcome to Beyond the Screenplay, the podcast where each episode we do a conversational deep dive analysis into a film. And today we are talking about Deadpool and Wolverine, written by Ryan Reynolds, Rhett Reese, Paul Wernick, Zeb Wells, and Sean Levy, directed by Sean Levy. I'm joined by part of the Beyond the Screenplay team today, Brian Bittner.
Hello, hello.
And we're delighted to have two guests with us. So we have Edward Vega joining us. Edward is a filmmaker and Webby Award-nominated video producer. He currently works at Vox Media, where he creates explainer-style videos covering pop culture, science, and cinema. Ed, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, happy to be here.
Excellent. And we're also delighted to have Sven Pape joining us. Sven is an ACE Award-nominated editor who has cut for James Cameron and Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Mark Webber. His YouTube channel, This Guy Edits, focuses on creative storytelling and editing. Sven, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. So excited to talk about this movie.
I can tell. We're all so excited. So really quick, I want to kind of introduce you guys more to our audience. And so a couple months ago, we were all invited to do a kind of group recording session for Digital Spaghetti, this kind of show put on by Patreon, where we all got to bring in cool YouTube videos that we like, and then together as a panel, live kind of analyze it and break it down. And I had never met you guys, but I had so much fun. And I feel like we all clicked and had really, all of your insights were really interesting. And it was just a really good time. I was like, we have to get these guys on the show. Like, that was so much fun. We need to have this conversation happen more. And it works out that a lot of the other half of our Beyond the Screenplay team aren't super keen into Marvel and or Deadpool. And so it was like, well, this is a sequel and we're doing a sequel summer season. This is a perfect place to bring in some guests and have an interesting conversation about it. But yeah, so I kind of want to hear if you sort of introduce yourselves to our audience and kind of what they might know you from and what you like about cinema. Sven, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I'm a working editor, and my YouTube channel started actually cutting an indie feature film with director Mark Webber, who is a Sundance filmmaker. I'm cutting a feature with him right now, and we're trying to do this again. But I really like to focus on the creative side of editing, talk about how editors shape scenes in a way that dramatically get the audience engaged in a scene. And so, yeah, I really enjoy talking about it on YouTube, and then also looking at big films and see what they do well and what we can learn.
Yeah. As a fellow editor, I love that you are doing that and teaching people about the art of editing and the language that goes into crafting a story, because it's such an important part and there aren't enough people talking about it. So thank you for the work that you do. Ed, what about you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, second that. Your channel rocks. I've learned so much. But yeah, I currently am a video producer at Vox. I make videos on a bunch of different topics. For a long time, it was about movies. It's shifting a little bit these days. But I've always loved the movies. I grew up watching stuff. I'm actually really excited that you brought me on for this episode specifically, because I love Marvel so much. I love superheroes. I love this big, dumb cinematic universe that we've all been following for way too long. And yeah, I obsess over every part of the filmmaking process. And as somebody who wants to make films, hopefully sooner rather than later, but yeah, I just think a lot about all of the writing, cinematography, editing, all that stuff that goes into making a good movie, and what is good, which I think is something that we'll talk about a lot today. And yeah, whenever I get the opportunity to, I try to bring people in for interviews on videos at Vox. One of the coolest ones that I had was a video about Top Gun Maverick and the sound design. And I got to speak to the Oscar award-winning sound designer for that, which is pretty cool. But yeah, thrilled to be here talking about Deadpool and Wolverine specifically.
Awesome. Yes. Yeah. Sound design, Top Gun Maverick is so good. It's a great video. We could talk about that for forever. The sound in this movie is good too, but we're not here necessarily to talk about sound. So, okay, well, yeah, so let's jump in. And so, sort of what we kind of like to do is kick it off with just like initial thoughts and reactions and kind of what your overall feeling was kind of leaving the theater. And so, I have never seen a Deadpool movie. This was my first Deadpool movie.
Whoa.
That's crazy.
I have, it's part of the culture. So I've seen clips and, snippets here and there. So I kind of knew what the shtick was. And I had pretty much, I think, accurately evaluated that it was not for me, that I was not perhaps the exact audience. And that perhaps if I was more of a 15-year-old boy that liked, people getting kicked in the balls, that that might be more of my thing. But when I saw that it was the team up with Wolverine, I was like, well, okay, I'm going to look a little closer here. And then the first trailer came out and it was teasing like some Marvel crossover. And I also really enjoyed the MCU. I think a lot of what they've pulled off is amazing and unique in cinematic history. And so as soon as it was signaling that maybe there was something more going on here and there's this added dimension, I was like, I'm curious. And so watching this movie, I had kind of an interesting arc with it where it was pretty bumpy for me at the beginning in terms of just like, this is the part that I accurately identified as not to my taste. But as it went on, there were fun cameos and there were some moments where kind of Deadpool got thrown to the side, literally, figuratively at times. And the story could focus on some of the other characters, Wolverine. It was fun to see Daphne Keane back. I loved Logan. So those moments kind of pulled me in more. And then by the end, I found myself just really having fun. And I feel like they nailed we're just going to have fun here for this finale. So that was my arc. I certainly have some qualms and issues with a little bit of the taste things, but also some of the story structure things. But overall, I walked out of theater having a pretty good time. So Ed, I want to hear from you as someone who loves the MCU. What was your reaction to this movie?
Yeah, it's a big question. So in preparation for this, I rewatched Deadpool 1 and 2, so I feel like I really had a good sense of it. And I really like those movies. I know that they're definitely not for everybody. Certainly when I tried to sit down and watch with my fiance, she was like, maybe I will sit out of this one. But I think that the Deadpool movies, generally speaking, do a really great job of like bringing in people with the foul language and the dick jokes. But underneath all that, there's like a strong layer of sentimentality, like especially in the first Deadpool. It's like so like unreasonably like emotional in a great way. So I was really excited for this. I mean, I loved Logan, as everyone does. It's a great movie. Love Wolverine, love Deadpool. And this is the only Marvel movie that's releasing this year. So with all that in mind, I was like, they must really have thought hard about like what this movie is going to be and like really try and make it something special, because it's the first time that we're bringing Deadpool into the MCU. And on a first watch, I got to admit, I was kind of disappointed. There was a lot of things that like really kind of struck me as strange. And it started so many arguments in my life because everybody that I know who has seen it really, really loved it. And, I think it operates in a weird space where if you think a lot about movies, if you think a lot about these characters like I do, I think there's a lot that maybe feels a little strange. But if you're not thinking so hard, if you're just coming in looking for a good, fun movie that will be exciting and has like fun fight scenes and good jokes and people that you like, you come out really winning. So I think this movie operates in a really interesting space. On a second watch, I liked it more. But I would love to know what Sven thinks before we get too deep into things.
Yeah.
So I am totally uninitiated. So I can barely tell what's a Marvel movie versus a DC movie. I have very little knowledge of the universe. I do know a little bit about kind of the filmmakers, like the Tim Miller story and the opening sequence of the original Deadpool that was groundbreaking, and also how it sort of set an anti-hero and a new way of dealing with sort of the Marvel universe. So I went into this kind of very uninitiated, open-minded in the sense that I don't know what happened before. I saw the opening credits and I thought, wow, I'm going to just have fun. If they keep this up, I'm okay with this. Like whatever they're going to do, like fourth wall jokes, breaking the fourth wall and whatever, let's go. And it just didn't keep up for a long time. I have like one major issue that I think for people that don't know much about it is a key issue for losing it in the middle of the film for a very long time. So I want to bring that up, what that is. And then I had a very similar experience at the end as you, Michael. Like once the Madonna track kicked in and they were like, at that point, the ending was fun and it was all very, very rewarding. So overall, I think, thank you for making me watch this movie on opening weekend and seeing it with a Marvel audience. I went pretty early, and before I went, my daughter and her boyfriend came in and they saw it on the night before. And they were utterly disappointed in this film. And her boyfriend is like grew up with Marvel. So they were like, this is a disaster. This is a horrible film. It jumped the shark, is what they said, basically. So I went into that with this in mind. And I'm like, overall, I felt like more positive than negative about the experience.
Yeah. Interesting. So, okay, cool. Well, yeah, so there's a lot to come back to. I definitely want to hear your key issue and talk about that. Brian, what did you make of this? I assume you've seen the other Deadpools?
I have. And beyond that, I've been following the X-Men movies since 2000, and even the animated series a little before that. Not a big comic guy, but I have watched a lot of those movies. So it's interesting, you've got the X-Men trilogy, and then they made a Wolverine movie, which was weird because he was already the main character of the X-Men trilogy. But then they made this pretty bad X-Men Origins Wolverine movie co-starring Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool. And of course, you just assume anyone in that movie doesn't matter and is going to get forgotten about forever. And then Ryan Reynolds is like, no, I want to actually play this character for real. I want to do it justice. Like he's the merc with the mouth, and then in that movie he's like this really dark, like messed up character. And then he pitched this, this idea, and Fox was like, nah, it's too gory, too whatever. And it's like, great. So he and Tim Miller made a short film that went viral, and they're like, I guess we'll make this movie. The movie made $1 gazillion, and one of the most highest grossing R-rated movies ever. And then now Deadpool's a thing, right? So it's just been very interesting to be and then I've also been enjoying the MCU over the years. So to have kind of Deadpool and Wolverine back in a movie together, from way back when they were in a movie that nobody cared about a long time ago, and then bring in the MCU. So it's you've got all this X-Men stuff, you've got the previous two Deadpool movies, you've got Wolverine's whole history. I enjoyed all that, and it was definitely it felt like it was for me with regard to I know it's Jennifer Garner walks on the street. I'm like, oh, it's Elektra, whatever. I'm going to know some of these. Channing Tatum as Gambit. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember when he was supposed to be that character, and then that movie never got made because I'm a movie nerd who knows that stuff. But that's not. You could watch every single movie Marvel has ever made, and you wouldn't get that reference unless meta things that are going on. I really had a blast with that. I really appreciated the opening of being hey, we know Logan happened, and it was a really beautiful send off. So no, we're not going to respect it. And just to show you that we mean it, we're literally going to have a fight scene with Logan's corpse that is going to be hitting people in the balls. And I was just you know what? If you're going to do it, then just do it. And they did it so hard where it was just great. Now you can do anything you want. And I feel this was a movie for me. I do like the movies that are the sort of fan service movies, winking to camera movies, like Austin Powers and Goldmember, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, where they're hey, literally, we're going to look at the camera sometimes. We're going to bring people in and kind of do this fun meta stuff. And this is the Avengers of that kind of movie, right? Where it's not just what Deadpool already is, but it's what Deadpool already is, but with this entire crazy history of Marvel and X-Men, and then even something like Elektra, which is just this side thing that happened in the Marvel dark years. So yeah, I really had a blast with it. Is it a perfect movie? I don't care, but also like I'm not going to disagree with any criticisms about. There are certain things where I'm like, oh yeah, that tonally I feel like was like the wrong time to do that. Structurally, it is weird. There's like a surprise fourth act, but I also like loved the surprise fourth act and had a great time with it. And yeah, lots to say, but overall was just a big smile on my face the whole time, and it just really felt like it did kind of everything I expected. And almost like anybody who thought this movie was bad, I'm like, what were you expecting? Like, what did you think this was going to be? And then last thing I'll say, as Ed was saying, the sentimentality of the Deadpool movies, it shocked me the first time I saw the first movie. I was like, why did I care so much about those characters? And it was like, oh, because the movie took time to make that actually happen, you know? And I really appreciate it. We'll get into that later, but I really appreciated that this movie was like, oh yeah, we are going to take some quiet moments and actually give both of these characters some real kind of depth and weight to the extent that this movie is interested in. You know, I'm not like sobbing or anything, but I am actually invested in a way that this movie very easily could have just ignored completely.
Nice. Yeah. All right, cool. So it feels like we're kind of all in a similar-ish space. I'm glad you called out that beginning, because, you know, in terms of how they're going to deal with the Logan connection, because in some ways I didn't even think they would try to deal with that. But then as soon as they started to, I was like, oh, well, no, of course. That was such an amazing send-off for that character. How do you deal with it? And I think they did kind of walk this line appropriately where they're not resurrecting that Logan. So that Logan's sacrifice still holds weight within that movie. But also, as you say, then he beats everyone to death with his bones. So it's like, I feel like there was some intelligent thought about how to navigate that, which I was ultimately impressed by and enjoyed watching the NSYNC Bye 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 dance. That was also a good time.
I feel like I'm the only person in the world who didn't like the NSYNC of it all. Not because it's not fun. In the previous Deadpool movies, I don't know, Brian, maybe you can tell me if I'm totally wrong here, but I feel like they have him doing similar stuff where he's like cracking jokes and looking at the camera and like dancing and stuff, but it all feels motivated. And this one, it felt very much like he was like, I'm the silly superhero, so I'm going to dance while I'm fighting, and I'm going to look at the camera like it's a TikTok. And I don't know, I just think that was like such a strange way to open the movie. And I don't know, I don't want to be like an old curmudgeon being like, don't make Deadpool dance. But I think the fight was like so creative, like maybe the most creative fight in the entire movie. And I feel like that kind of took the air out of it a little bit for me.
I agree. Like, yeah, I mean, it was weird that it was like two things happening at once. It was like we're cutting between the fight and then the like literally dancing to camera, as opposed to he's dancing or like the music is happening diegetically or whatever. I had no problem with that song being used because I loved how insane it was, you know. But yeah, there was a weird like tonal thing there where I was just like, which thing are you doing right now? But I still was just giddy watching it because it was so ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, that's good. It's got jokes.
So Ed, yeah, you said there were some strange things for you in the movie. What were some of those that stood out and kind of?
There's a lot. Well, first, before we get into that, if it's okay, I want to ask you guys who haven't really kept up with the Deadpool movies and the MCU, like, for me, it seemed like the amount of homework that you had to do to understand everything that was going on was immeasurable. Like, did you guys feel like you had a good grasp of like all the things, or did it like not matter so much that it was weighed down by all these relationships to shows and things that have happened before, sometimes 20 years before?
So I felt like they did a really good job doing the exposition right after the opening to catch us up on Wolverine. I had forgotten that Wolverine had died in Logan, and reminding us and then explaining where they are and how they relate to each other. And then throughout, I never felt like I really needed to know everything in terms of who's who. I mean, I know Jennifer Garner. Oh, she was like Daredevil and somebody else. Oh, that's probably her. And then Johnny, I thought that's Captain America because I felt like that actor.
We got to talk about
Captain,
that. Yeah,
Captain America. So for a long time, I was very confused there, but it never got in the way of the story. So for me, with like knowing barely anything, it was not a problem at all.
That's cool to hear. Yeah, because I think I knew enough about everything and just general culture that even if I hadn't seen the movies, I like understood the references, and I was like, oh, that's his like wife or girlfriend, and something happened, and I was able to put the pieces together to follow the character arc. At least I do feel like that kind of first party for his birthday, I was like, I don't really know who any of these people are. I don't know if I'm supposed to know. These don't seem like people I've seen in previous movies, so maybe those are all new characters. Were those all new characters basically, except for his like love interest character?
No, they were all
characters. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they were all characters from the previous Deadpool movies. And I mean, this actually, pretty cleanly segues into sort of my biggest issue with the movie. Is it's a structural thing. I feel like, the whole premise is that he is fighting for his timeline. And we can, get into how we get there with all that later. But I think that they didn't do a very good job in the scene for his birthday and, leading up to him going on this big adventure to make us care about his timeline. Like, I've seen the other Deadpool movies. I do care about all those characters that were in those scenes. But I feel like they did a lot of weird things. Like if I were to tell you, if I were to pitch you on a movie about a guy who the love of his life is dating somebody else, like they're not really together anymore. The thing that he loved doing, he doesn't do anymore. And he's working at a dead end job and is sort of like unsure of like what is supposed to be happening next in his life. And then somebody came to him and was like, hey, do you want to go on a big adventure with like a team that everybody likes? I think you would say, yeah, absolutely. Like circumstantially, that makes sense for that character. He needs a shakeup. He needs to do something new. So it was very interesting that they took it that way. But then I feel like they tried to sort of have their cake and eat it too, where they were like, oh, but you have to fight for this timeline. And they don't make you care about the timeline. Like, I just think that character in that space, while yes, it's terrible that like everyone will die. Abstractly, that's obviously terrible. But within the context of the movie, they didn't make us care about any of those people. Like, I think if the setup of the movie was that he was like on top of the world, the happiest that he had ever been, everybody in his life, loved him. And then he was invited to join a team, but he had to give up everything that he fought so hard to have. The whole movie would have, for me, had more emotional weight. I think that took the air out of Deadpool's storyline for me the whole time. And it's sort of a weird setup. The crux of his arc is that he wants to matter. He wants to, he isn't part of the Avengers, and that destroys him. And if you watch the first two Deadpool movies, he doesn't really care about being in the X-Men. Like, mostly he doesn't want to be in the X-Men. So this idea that he, like, craves a team and, like, is so broken by the fact that he isn't part of one, I think they try to take steps in the middle of the movie to, like, make you understand why that should be important to the character. But for me, that didn't have the weight that I felt it needed to. But I feel consequently that they nailed the Wolverine storyline. Like it was so beautifully done. Hugh Jackman, like performance of a lifetime. He was incredible. Anyways, I said a lot of things, so I'll let you guys chime in.
Yeah. I mean, no, I agree. I think, comparing it for a moment with Logan, one of the things that we talked about in the Lessons from Screenplay video we did about Logan, comparing it to Children of Men, is the first act of Logan spends so much time setting up the headspace of where Logan is and his old world. So he's like broken. He's taking care of essentially like an aging father. Like everyone he loves is dead, and he's kind of ready to like go also. And they spend, it's like a 40-minute first act. It's a very long period of time that lets you meet the characters, understand the world, kind of get settled there, so that then when the Daphne Keane character shows up and there is a spark of hope, we like really viscerally feel and understand what that's going to mean. I remember getting emotional when they reveal that she also has the claws. It was such a confusing moment for me of like, I don't really care about Wolverine that much. Why do I want to cry to see now that I'm seeing that there's this little girl that could also, like, it's his daughter. Anyway, spiritual daughter. And so I think that it was rushed through in this movie. I can't say I was deeply invested in Deadpool's character arc at any point. And I think I kind of just dismissed it because it was like, well, this is Deadpool and they're gonna, they're setting up stuff because they have to set up stuff and then we're gonna move on. But it would have been cool. And maybe this is in the earlier movies, but also understanding his motivation for being so jokey, like being the merc with the mouth. He has kind of a throwaway line at some point where he's like, I make jokes when I'm afraid or something to that effect. But that's a joke unto itself. It doesn't really feel motivated. And so if they were interested in trying to get me deeply into the psychology of Deadpool, it didn't exactly work. But it also felt like they were more interested in just having fun and doing a cool montage and then getting us into the multiverse as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I did buy his, like, I want to matter. I want to be part of a team, because I didn't know any of what you just said, Ed. What I was a little bit struggling with was that he wanted to save his timeline because of his friends. Because I felt like when they initially introduced like that party scene where they're there, it didn't really feel like these are true friends to him. It was like a group of misfits just hanging out. And so by the time that he like had to make that decision, I want to save my timeline because of them, I completely missed that this is like supposed to be the moment to emotionally get us invested in his timeline. And so at that point, it was just mute to me why he would try to save his timeline. That would be the only problem that I had with this, sort of his journey, his character's journey.
Yeah, there's a lot being juggled here, which is the plot itself, which is we've got Matthew McFadden's character over here at the TVA being like, here's my plan, here's what I'm going to do. And then we have Cassandra over here being like, here's my plan, here's what I'm going to do. And yes, they're going to come together, but it feels like these are these two separate things. And then it's like when we first get to her layer, it's like, oh, they're doing like a Mad Max thing. It's like a joke. And then it's like, oh no, this is actually where the whole movie is. like this is we're staying here, which is why I liked the fourth act, because when it was, I don't know if it's actually a fourth act, but to me, the big battle at Cassandra's thing felt like, oh, this is the finale of the movie. And then they were like, no, we're going to go do a real finale. I was like, okay, good. Because I felt like that was like fun and games. And then we can go do something a little bit more meaty. Which is the Deadpool army fight, of course, which is like, not that that's not completely insane too. But then on top of the plot stuff, then we have Deadpool's character arc. Then we have Wolverine's character arc. So yeah, I agree that there's a lot more you could have done here. And it's a 2 hour and 8 minute movie in a time of movies being just 2 hours 30, 240 or something like that. And I'm glad it's shorter, but also it just meant that like, if we're going to shove in all these cameos, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, then we have to kind of skim over some stuff. Even the like montage of him going and finding the different Wolverines, like I didn't quite get like, oh, just they don't like you, so therefore none of them, like you can't, if there was only one, then the whole movie would be like, I got to convince him to work with me. But instead it's like, oh no, they all punch me right away, so I guess I'll just leave this universe and go to a different one or something. So yeah, there was just a lot that got skimmed over, and I was really happy with how it all, I mean, it's, as I think most of us already said, it's like by the end, you feel like you did it. You somehow did it, where I feel like really satisfied by this ending. We should talk about the ending too, with where both of those characters end up. But yeah, there is a lot of skimming and a lot of sort of like messiness along the way in order to get us off to the races.
Yeah, to that point, I just want to say, I mean, I feel like it's always really difficult to talk about these movies because, like, that the checklist is a million miles long. Like, they had so many things that they needed to accomplish. They needed to make so many different people happy. They needed to, like, figure out ways to bring all of these characters together. So, like, the fact that it works at all is a miracle, and like that can't be overstated. So even though, yeah, we're sitting in the easy chair. Like, I'm sure there was a million drafts of this where they maybe had all that stuff. And like you were saying, like, for pure pacing purposes, took some out to make sure that the movie wasn't 3 hours long.
Yeah. Like any movie is a miracle. Getting it made, like making movies is so hard. There's so much that has to go right. And so that was another reason why I was kind of drawn to this. As soon as I sort of got from the trailer the amount of things that we're going to be juggling, I was like, I'm just out of curiosity. I want to see what this is like and how you managed to pull this off. And so maybe I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Sven, sort of talking about the editing. There's a lot of montages, a lot of like editing forward moments, but also kind of quiet moments, more traditional, you know, like when Logan's sitting with Laura at the campfire and it's just like this quiet character moment. What were your thoughts from an editing perspective as you were watching this movie?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's very hard for me to like analyze the editing when I'm watching a movie. That usually means if I start thinking about the editing, then it's a bad movie that draws its attention to it. If it's a good movie, I'm just invested in the story. So I would say overall, I think this movie is cut excellently. I think they did an amazing job pacing wise. I'm glad that it's not 2.5 hours or longer. I think it could have been just a little bit shorter, but I think it was good. Like I didn't feel like I was suffering through a lot. So can't really say something specific about the editing other than I felt like it worked. If maybe I can talk about what I think is a big flaw for me in the film.
Sure. Yeah.
It's kind of after we kind of get to know Wolverine's story and they sort of start arguing and start fighting. Like I completely did not understand what was the point of them fighting if nobody dies or gets hurt. So
because it looks cool.
I didn't know that Deadpool regenerates. So that we
Kinda
learned
same.
way later.
Yeah.
So at this point, I'm like, okay, we just saw them fighting for what felt like 25 minutes with zero character development, nothing. They could have just said, I hate you, and walk away, and it would have been the same end result dramatically. So I think that's a huge problem. And I have a question for you, Ed, about this, because doesn't he get hurt? And he doesn't regenerate, right?
No, Wolverine also regenerates. I think that's a little
regenerates.
bit the hard part is that they have sort of similar powers in that regard. But I agree that it like when nobody gets hurt, it's hard to know like what makes this fight interesting or like, you know, what is the arc of the fight, which I feel like Marvel usually does really well. Like they always have very creative ideas. So yeah, I agree that the fight's a little bit didn't punch as hard as I wanted.
That means for me, like how long, I don't know how long that scene was, but let's say it was like 25, 30 minutes where just the movie just had no dramatic progression moving forward. We're just sitting through a fight scene that is not as good as the opening scene and it's very sort of repetitive in terms of just trashing that Honda Odyssey, where I felt like at that point I would have considered walking out of the movie at that point because they really lost me there for quite a while. And I don't know if it's like, does it feel differently for somebody who's like fully invested and understands the whole MCU where that makes more sense?
I'll say I think that yes and no. I think that there is a sort of, since the comics, there's always like a Wolverine versus Hulk, Spider-Man versus whatever, you know, like there's always like, how are we going to get these two characters together and make them fight, you know? And I think we talked about this in a recent episode, but it's like the Avengers, they don't know each other yet, so they don't trust each other and they're fighting and they're mad and whatever. And then Hulk is always there as someone in the movies who can just suddenly go full Hulk and then they have to fight him. And so I think on a meta level, there's the two fights, right? There's the fight in the 20th Century Fox graveyard, and then there's the one in the car. And that first one, I was like, okay, like he even like looks to camera, is like, all right, you know, get ready, nerds, here it comes. Where I felt like on a meta level, they were like, yeah, we're gonna make Deadpool and Wolverine fight, like that's what we got to do, right? And so that part of me was like fine with it. It was just like, okay. But then Sven, to your point, story-wise and everything, it just sort of felt like, yeah, I don't care that this is happening right now. Like this doesn't mean anything right now. And then I'm going to talk about this more when we get into lessons, but I really love how this whole trilogy of movies handles the comedy and the drama kind of weaving between them. And the moment that did not work for me was leading into that car fight, because they were like screaming at each other and having this like character moment and everything. And it felt to me, other than the fact that his Deadpool's mask was still on, because it feels like there are certain things that signal to you like that we're in serious mode and we're not. So maybe that was subconsciously signaling to me like we are in kind of comedy land. But they were like screaming like their own insecurities at each other and like all their problems and everything. And then Deadpool's like, I'm gonna fight you now, and it was like, okay, and the fight was cool. Both fights I enjoyed. Like I enjoyed, again, just as like I'm watching a fun, goofy comic book movie thing, but it felt really like you could have earned that fight, but you can't go serious into the car fight, right? Because it's a silly car fight. So you then have to, but then you use a serious scene to get into the goofy car fight. So it was that kind of thing. So yeah, I totally agree with you, Sven, that like story-wise, they didn't feel motivated enough. But then on a meta level, I think there is a little bit like, we're like Marvelized to just be like, okay, it's like the characters are going to fight now, so whatever.
You can have a fight scene that reveals characters, so maybe the plot doesn't move, but at least we're learning something about the characters. And I would say even that first, fight didn't quite do that for me, but maybe it's because I'm familiar enough with the characters and like, Wolverine's angry, I get it. But then, yeah, exactly what you're saying, Brian, that car scene was a moment where I was really struggling because it felt like they were going serious and then Deadpool would undercut it with a joke, and they were going serious and then Deadpool would undercut it with a joke, and then they went serious. And I feel like Hugh Jackman even said, Logan says like, is this where you make a joke, or kind of like it's sort of set up like he's going to make a joke again, but we're not going to do that because this is serious. But instead of really doubling down on serious and letting that moment be a heavy moment, it was like, well, now we're going to fight. And then it goes into a fight. And so it felt like it was actually undercutting some character growth and plot movement with a silly fight that was fun. But I was like, this is undercutting it. And this is a beat that we've already seen. We've already seen you guys fight. So we're just watching it again.
Yeah, that was a thing I was curious about, because it did feel like they didn't do anything new from the first fight. And I mean, for you guys, you haven't seen the first two Deadpool movies, but in other fights, he'll like break all of like his arms and his legs, like to prove a point, or like cut off his own hand if it's like, shackled to something. So I was really surprised that they didn't have Wolverine like cut off a limb or something, and then he has to like fight with a tiny little baby hand or something. And, I'm sure they've gone through every iteration of how to make a Wolverine and Deadpool fight work, and then they put the good ones in the movie. So there must be some reason why, but it was curious to me that like the vehicle joke, the vehicle for the fight was a vehicle and not,
right,
like something to do with their powers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sort of talking about that moment too, kind of bridges into another thought I was having is the performances were like pretty good, or at least there were, I think, some key performances that were great. Hugh Jackman, I feel like, came to deliver, and I kept waiting for them to make some kind of like joke about like, oh, and there's your Oscar or something like that. And I kind of liked the restraint that they didn't, but there were definitely moments where in that car scene, they kind of let an unbroken take of just his performance happen. And I was like, okay, that a good performance is happening here. And then Emma Corrin, Cassandra, was really great. I kind of didn't know that she was in the movie. You kind of heard about it last minute. I was like, who's she playing? And so interesting to have her be Charles Xavier's surprise sister. Maybe that's in the comics. I don't know. But she was just so delightful and fun and committed, and somehow struck in her performance for me this balance of I'm silly and goofy enough to be in a Deadpool movie. Like I don't feel like I'm so serious an actor that I'm misplaced in this movie, but also was delivering like a really great, fun performance with gravitas. And so I just feel like she was balancing kind of a lightness and a silliness and a darkness and a seriousness. And it was just like really fun for me every time she was on screen. What did you guys think of the performances? Sven, you look like you're thinking deeply.
Oh, it's just, I mean, I didn't recognize her. I'm just looking up her credits to see where she was. I see The Crown. I guess
The Crown,
that's
I
where
think, was
I
her
haven't watched that show.
big. Oh, it's so good.
I thought she was phenomenal. I really thought that she did a great villain to this that really carried the sort of second act. I thought that Hugh Jackman is a great actor and he did a great performance, but I felt the character just didn't grow until the end. So I felt like he was mopey for 70% of the movie, which is the Logan shtick. But I didn't see any nuances in that mopiness or something where I could see in the middle that they were like working on each other or he was processing things. It was it there? I don't know. I didn't catch it. Maybe it was so subtle that was the problem. I thought everybody else was fine and Ryan Reynolds is doing whatever he does, and I can handle it for a little while. So I wouldn't want to watch every Ryan Reynolds movie out there. I just saw If actually the week before, and I thought that movie, like, he felt like checked out, and this movie had a lot of problems. And so it was nice to see him being really invested. I could. It just came through that he deeply cares about this film and about this character, and he went for it. Like, he wrote the script, and he's gonna do whatever he's gonna do, and potentially really save a big part of this Marvel sort of slump that we might be in by just taking this shot. So that would be my take on the performances. I don't know.
Yeah.
Did anybody feel like the Hugh Jackman had more of a character arc?
Yeah.
I definitely hear what you're saying. Sorry, not to cut Michael off. Go ahead.
No, please.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think obviously Hugh Jackman was incredible. Like, he was maybe the best one in the movie. Like, he crushed every scene he was in. Everybody else was incredible too, not to take that away from them. But I agree, but I don't think that's so much of a symptom of his performance as it is that, like, for me, Deadpool and Wolverine, they never felt like they were, not that they were supposed to, like, become friends, but they didn't feel like they were, like, making each other better, which I think is what a lot of, like, you know, buddy cop movies or two-hander movies usually do, is that, like, they fill in the blanks. And I think that's the thing that makes that arc not ring as hard as maybe I want it to. I don't know if anybody else agrees, but
Yeah, I would agree with that. I both missed Hugh Jackman even when he was there. Kind of like you were saying, Sven, it felt like he was kind of mopey in the background for a lot of it. I was like, you have Hugh Jackman here, you have Wolverine. Like, why is he not a bigger part of some of these scenes? And I think part of that is just the first half is sort of like cameo land, and so it's just spending time on all the, like, well, we got to introduce this person and that person, and then in the back half they kind of give Hugh Jackman something to do. But I agree kind of with your kind of appraisal there, Ed, of like it, because I think even Deadpool's character arc, as we've said, felt maybe a little bit forced or not quite earned. It wasn't that super clear, again, like Logan, you know, where Logan is paired with this girl. They need each other. They don't want to need each other. They don't like it, but they're these two, it's an odd couple pairing, and they're going to be forced to go on this journey together, and they're going to make each other the best version of themselves by the end of that. And again, at the end, I think they pulled some of that off. And, you know, when they were holding each other's hands and the electricity was flying through them, I was like, yeah, you guys did it. I don't exactly know what you did or what you overcome to get here, or why that was such an issue before, but it's like landing. And so I think it is a writing problem, and in that setup of like not clearly understanding their flaw, their lack, and why each of them is like we're saying, a clear filling in the hole for the other is probably my biggest narrative problem with the character arcs.
Well, I'll add that I think that, like, I love Hugh Jackman. I love his performance. He was the first person to ever call me mate. And
you met Hugh Jackman?
I did. Yeah. It's New York. After The Boy from Oz, before The Boy from Oz.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a little thing here with that Logan's backstory, which is we don't get into it for a while, and we make jokes about how we're not going to get into it. But then when we get into it, it's like he's like, I was at the bar and my friends died or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have quite the weight that, and I was like, man, what if he had gotten Laura killed in his timeline, and then now Laura from Logan and Wolverine from this movie are like meeting, and like, what does that mean? And you know, and like that could have had a lot of weight to it and stuff. Again, there's not really time for that. There's not really tonal time for that. But I think there was something about his backstory that is thin in the writing, and I think Hugh Jackman makes up for it in the performance. I feel that he has gone through everything he goes through, but I don't necessarily, what he has gone through doesn't necessarily mean a ton to me. But all that being said, I feel, you know, when he just starts getting in his, you know, you see the veins in his whatever because he's really upset about something, I'm just like, yeah, you're Hugh Jackman. Yeah, so those are my thoughts there. But also, if we could pivot a little, since you mentioned Cameo Land, Michael, I feel like I want to talk about some of this stuff. On the way to the theater, my partner and I were talking, and I said, it's sort of unfortunate. I said, I'm really curious to see what this movie does. I've been able to avoid most of the cameos, but it's sort of unfortunate that cameos don't matter anymore because they happen all the time. You know, anyone can throw a chunk of change at someone and be like, come be in my movie. And they're like, okay. And I felt like 20 years ago, it was like, oh my God, can you believe like they got, you know, this A-list star to come and like do that one funny scene? Like, that's incredible. And now it's like, that's all what happens all the time. And the time I felt that the most was Multiverse of Madness, where they go and they meet the Illuminati. And it's just like, look, we got Professor X, like he's in it, he's in the movie, look at him, you know, and it's like, okay. And then of course you do a meta thing, which is what they do with Channing Tatum here in that movie, where you have John Krasinski as Reed Richards, which was like the fan favorite choice and stuff. So it's like, okay, you're doing like some playful meta stuff, but it just felt like, it literally felt like, you know, they just sort of were like, look, we're wheeling out the cameos. Here they are. Look at them. They're in the movie. Did you see them? All right, they're gone. So I was like, but I had some faith that this movie was going to do stuff in an interesting way. And one thing I think it did really smartly was to group up characters. So it's like because you've got Sabretooth and Toad from the original X-Men movie here, you know, and like the same actors. But like they are almost glorified extras in this movie because they're all part of this team, right? And then you have some of the other returning characters in Cassandra's little in Ant-Man, and so it's like you can kind of get away with having a bunch of cameos that are just sort of throwaway cameos because you're not doing the cameo thing where it's like, I know someone who can help. Walk to a house, knock on a door, open the door. Oh, it's that actor. Let's have a scene with them. All right. And like, oh, now someone's over here. You're grouping them up. And then that also is true with Elektra and Blade and Gambit and Laura, is like, oh, they are a group of people. They are sort of like thematically connected to kind of what Wolverine's going through, but also to this story world that we've already met in this insane Mad Max desert area. And like they have something they care about and they want their ending, and like they get to have like some moments and stuff. And it just felt like, okay, you chose the ones you want to actually focus on. You chose the ones that are going to be a background. And then Chris Evans may be my favorite cameo of all time. Like I thought it was so genius the way they handled it, where it's like he shows up, you hear his voice, like, I think it's Chris Evans. You see his arm, and it's like there's some blue in there. You're like, oh man, he's wearing the Captain America suit. We're getting Captain America here. And then he turns, and it's Chris Evans, and then he says like, "Dick for brains" or whatever. And Deadpool kind of looks at him like, that's weird, you know. I was expecting like a language. And then you know, Deadpool's like, oh, he's gonna say it, Avengers is on. He goes, flame on. It's Johnny Storm from the Fantastic Four movie. And like also the balls that Marvel has to like throw themselves under the bus in this movie, like when he says, you're joining us at like a low point, and like, look, the multiverse thing, we tried it didn't really work, like let's move on. It's like, this isn't just a Deadpool movie, this is Deadpool in a Kevin Feige produced MCU movie, and they're able to do this kind of stuff, which I thought was really cool. So just to have a cameo where you have the actor but he's playing the wrong character. Like, I just thought, what a genius way to do that. And I feel like that's that's kind of a lot of times when you're doing, or I laughed so hard when Nice Pool says, I can do fourth wall breaking too, and just looks at the camera and says, the proposal, and that's it, right?
Right.
Because it's like, we're going to do the thing we've always done, but how can we do it in a way that hasn't quite been done yet? So I felt like the Johnny Storm cameo, that little proposal moment, it was like, oh yeah, you're finding a way to kind of meta the meta, like you're staying one step ahead of the audience. So that was my feeling about all of it. Was I just really enjoyed the fact that they were like, we know how Deadpool is always like, we know how things are done, so we're going to kind of think about what the next step is. How can we do the joke you're expecting, but then do it one step further?
Yeah, but that kind of the meta on the meta is interesting because it is sort of a deep cut, that Johnny reference, and it was like the edge of my brain to be like, oh, right, because Chris Evans was originally that character in that Fantastic Four movie from 20 years ago, and now I understand what's happening. And Sven, it sounded like you didn't like even get that reference, and that was almost like a point of confusion for you. Is that?
Well, I thought it's Captain America until like halfway into his journey. It's like, wait, why did I keep calling him Johnny? And I had no idea who Johnny was. So, but I just moved on. It didn't affect sort of the overall experience at all.
Yeah, but it is a cool use case. I agree, Brian. Like that was a fun, clever use of that, and which almost then made me a little bit sad when the other cameos came in. Like it was, the music was pounding, and I was like, all right, here we come. And I was like, oh, Jennifer Garner. Oh, cool, good for you. Like that's fun to see you. And like, oh, Blade. Okay, Wesley Snipes. Okay, sure. And then the Channing Tatum one, it was another deep cut where I was like, Channing Tatum. Oh, there was probably something where he was supposed to play that character. And so I think I've logicked my way to understanding why this is cool. And it's just interesting when you're kind of like you were saying, Ed, at the beginning, the checklist of things you have to like check off, and that you're balancing these movies, like who you make any given moment for, when some of those moments truly have to be for just a subset of the audience. How you balance that without throwing people off the ride is tricky and ultimately impressive. But there was a part of me that was like, but also these are the cameos we have left. Like, is there anybody left in the barrel there? Maybe not.
Yeah, totally. I do also wonder if there's a meta thing going on. Well, not wonder, because we know there is. They reference it in the movie, but it's like the Fantastic Four movie. The next one has been like cast and is kind of in pre-production now and stuff, right? So it's like, hey, let's literally reference the fact that we did this already, and kind of no one really liked it that much, And then Mahershala is Blade, and like that's coming out, and Wesley Snipes like, I'm the only Blade there will ever be, and it's like, and then Daredevil is kind of being brought back to the MCU, which means Elektra is going to be too. So I do think there is like hey, we can have fun with some of these past characters the same way Spider-Man No Way Home did, of being like these things that weren't part of this canon, but they were, and they're part of this property. So let's like get goofy and have fun with it, but also potentially in a forward-thinking way of like, let's remind people that Blade exists. Let's remind people that Fantastic Four exists, right? Like there's possibly a couple things going on there.
Yeah.
I feel like also that I was thinking about the Barbie movie. And there's like a time before Barbie and a time after Barbie in terms of how studios and Marvel and so on throws themselves under the bus. I think the filmmakers might have more liberty right now to pitch these ideas and go for it because of Barbie. And so I'm just wondering if maybe that had an effect where they can really go for it.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Fox Disney thing. I mean, I thought it was like so unnecessary. But it seemed like they really wanted to just make this point.
Well, and even just like those references are such a like industry pointed, like the average moviegoer, do they know what the difference is between Fox and Disney and who owns what rights? And so again, that thing of trying to hold all of it and make it get in enough jokes so you can have he stabbed him in the penis, but also like, here's a rights joke about how things get tied up in development. It's kind of crazy that this movie is holding all of those things at once. Yeah.
It's interesting. Well, in terms of the Chris Evans thing, also I think maybe one of the best jokes in the movie is after his skin gets ripped off and his organs and bones fall to the ground. Deadpool was like, oh, come on, you knew what he was doing to the budget. He had to go.
Yeah, that was funny.
Incredible joke.
Thank God somebody died at this point. I was like, yes, finally, change.
Yeah, but I mean, were there really consequences? I don't know. That's a whole other discussion. But to the point of Cameo Land, I feel like thinking about how this movie went over the weekend, I sort of realized that it's so much more of a meditation on like the studio system and like Disney buying Fox than it is anything else. Like, they basically take Deadpool and Wolverine to this graveyard where they literally have the 20th Century Fox logo like in the earth. And they're like, yeah, this is all dead now. And we might destroy this timeline. And they never really made this clear previously, but Logan operates in the Deadpool timeline. So like in the Deadpool movies, and I don't think in the X-Men movies, they ever made it clear that they were like within the same space very much for a bunch of legal reasons. But they brought them all there, and then they brought all these legacy characters where they were like, oh, all these characters, you're never going to see them again, or like they're dead. Like, and we own them now. And this is like our send-off. This is our goodbye. Let's give them all an ending. And within that, also give Deadpool and Wolverine like a reason to jump from their timeline to the MCU timeline. So like the meta text of the script, like in the same way that Barbie was, like it's so textured, and it really at least went over my head. I don't know if it went over anybody else's head, but there was just, it didn't strike me until after just how much of the movie was a commentary on letting go of all of these things that people loved so that we can move forward and do new things. And like you're saying, Brian, reminding them that like, oh, we got more Daredevil, we got the Fantastic Four. Like, don't worry. I know that maybe right now things aren't as good as you thought they would be, but like, it's coming.
Yeah. And I also want to shout out one of my favorite lines in the movie was, well, the meta thing. When you watch one of these movies, you always have your meta brain on because you're like, oh yeah, I know that person's already signed on for this. It drives me crazy that a character surviving a movie isn't thought of as a spoiler the way a character died. So it's like the weekend before John Wick 3 came out, it was like, Keanu Reeves signs on for John Wick 4. And I was just like, well, like, don't tell me now that he survives the movie when it's literally like an army of people trying to kill him. Like, why is that not a spoiler? So going into the final room, one of us has to go into the room, right? It's the end game, jumping off the thing, or Infinity War, those movies. Yeah. And then, Wolverine's going to go in. I'm like, oh, sure, you can kill off Wolverine, because first of all, like this, Hugh Jackman doesn't want to just play Wolverine until he's 90. And second of all, like we just brought him back for this movie and that's it. And then Deadpool goes in and I'm like, meta level, like, no, you don't do all this work to bring Deadpool into the MCU to then kill him off right away, right? So I'm thinking like in the back of my head, I guess this doesn't really make sense. I guess they could do it, but and then they both go in and I'm like, oh, wow, okay, so I guess they are just going to kill them both off. And then they both survive. I was like, okay, so it's kind of your thing, Sven, of just like, it doesn't really matter. There's not real sacrifices being made, But the line that I loved was they're sitting having shawarma, of course. And then, Deadpool's like, oh, so I'll see you around. And Logan just goes, probably not, and I kind of love that as a like, we could do more with these characters, but we're probably not going to. Like, we probably shouldn't, right? And then the fact that Logan does get to hang out with Deadpool's family, essentially, and kind of see, like, I didn't get to save my timeline, but I did get to save this one, So I just love probably not as a, we're not definitively saying anything, but also that's how we feel right now. Is like, there's probably no reason to keep doing this, but like, also this character gets to actually have a happy ending, and I like that.
Yeah.
Same. Incredible send-off.
I actually think that example you just brought up is actually a good example of character development because it's like in storytelling, yes, this plausible yet surprising. So you anticipated a certain ending, like either this guy's going to die or that one is going to die, or the fact that they had to go in both to survive is plausible yet surprising. And so that was actually very rewarding in terms of character growth. They needed each other to survive this. And so it made total sense to me.
Yeah. I think it was then that they survived kind of undercut the sacrifice a little bit, but but did all these things on top of it. So I think ultimately netted out as a positive for the story. And yeah, I do want to talk about that ending, because we've been talking about how great it was. Really quick though, kind of to retread the ground that leads us back to the ending, having the character arc for these forgotten characters be people that didn't get an ending is like really powerful. Like I think that's a really cool, arc for this kind of world and for these superheroes that feels, I don't know, like visceral. Like it's visceral for them and it's us. Like they didn't get an ending for themselves and we didn't get the ending either. So it kind of pulls you in. And I only wish that it was a little bit more unified with the protagonists' endings, like, or character arcs. Because it seems like it's kind of tangential, but if Deadpool was sort of like, this is my last ride, like I need the ending that I deserve. And if that's kind of what Wolverine's thing was, and it is there, but I feel like it's not clear and they're not all kind of working in conjunction and pushing on each other. At least that wasn't the case for me. I think it is there enough though that by the time that we get to the end, those things are all kind of, those dominoes are happening together and it is creating this meaning. And like you, Brian, I was in my meta head, I didn't know who was going to live or die because they had set up a world in which both the characters, I understand why they would want to sacrifice, and meta world, I was like, well, yeah, Deadpool, I don't know that he's going to work as an Avenger. I don't know that you need to keep him around MCU. But at the same time, like, well, you just brought Wolverine back. You're not going to kill him, but Hugh Jackman maybe doesn't want to do. So like, it was one of the rare times that the meta world and story fit nicely on top of the character journey story, such that I didn't know what was going to happen. Right. And that's such a fun and honestly rare thing to occur. And I was very surprised to find myself genuinely not knowing what was going to happen next in Deadpool and Wolverine. So that was one of my favorite parts of the ending.
Also, real quick, speaking of Ed, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, was there no mention of the fact that Ryan Reynolds was in Blade Trinity?
Well, I mean,
felt like yet another thing they could have easily done.
Yeah, well, Blade says like "I don't like you," which I think was sort of
that
trying
what it was?
to reference
okay.
all that stuff. But to your point about the beauty of them getting their ending when they didn't get one, it sort of, I think, ties into what I was saying earlier, that this movie, I think, works better as a meta look at like the Fox merger, which is such a weird thing to do. But in terms of Deadpool wanting to matter, like, I think it makes more sense that he wants to matter to the MCU enough that maybe he gets to keep playing around in it and that he doesn't, have his ending like all these other characters are going to. And they sort of allow him to, have the moment where he could do all the things that maybe will let him carry on in this timeline or this multiverse. So in a weird way, I feel like the meta storylines are stronger than like the in-story storylines, in media storylines.
Yeah, it's an interesting aspect of this movie. I kind of want to move to like lessons and continue this conversation in the framework of lessons. So what lessons do you feel like you guys are going to take away from this movie? Do's or don'ts, things that you feel like you want to bring into your own work? What lessons are we going to take away from Deadpool and Wolverine? I'm going to start with Brian and give you guys time to think and shore up your thoughts if you want. But Brian, what lessons are you going to take away from Deadpool and Wolverine?
I mean, I was thinking about the as I talked about a little earlier, balancing the drama and the comedy, and how all the Deadpool movies have done this, and how to get away with it. And I think, Michael, you were saying one of the behind the scenes of Endgame or Civil War or something, where they were saying like, we always made sure we gave these characters the dramatic moments, and then we gave these characters. So it's like when you were in that world, you knew you could be in this emotional place, and when you were in that world, you could be in this emotional place. And I was thinking about, for all of his scowling, the fact that Wolverine is playing the straight man here, right? So it's like when he suddenly goes into a monologue about how he lost everything, you're like, yeah, that feels correct. That doesn't feel like a weird surprise turn that this character would make. When he like knocks out Pyro, and then he says, not everyone gets a monologue. I was like, oh, that's like I think the first time the entire movie he's made like a kind of meta quip, because that's not his character, right? And of course, we're getting into like fun ending territory, so it's like, all right, we can give him a little line like that. And then I mentioned, I think there is something even as simple as Deadpool versus Wade, like with mask on, mask off. Like Deadpool doesn't get to be serious, but Wade does. And that's not a one-to-one comparison at all. But I do think it's like those little ways of the movie signaling to us, we are kind of going into this place, and we're going to be down here for a while, and then we're going to go back up to this place. And you're not going to suddenly have like a really emotional moment during the Deadpool army fight, right? And you're not going to have super meta quippy jokes during the flashback where he and Vanessa are at the dining table and she's saying you're never going to amount to anything or whatever. Like the movie knows which thing it's doing at which time. And so I think it's partially by which characters you give that to. And I think it is also, we talk about movies trying to be too many things at once. And I think it's because they are trying to be those things at once. So like the example I always give, because I hate it so much, is Moulin Rouge, where we're going into the big dramatic scene at the end that is very emotional and very sad. But like when they knock out the bad guy, his gun flies out the window and it bonks the Eiffel Tower and makes like a ding sound and then whatever. And like, not now. Like, why now? Because you're putting me in like goofy fun time thing, which that movie is full of. But like not now, right? And there are other ways of doing that, of pulling the rug out from under this. I know, Michael, you've talked about this with like The Office and BoJack Horseman, like shows that are like, hey, we're funny, and like, oh crap, like someone just said something or whatever. There are definitely ways of doing that, but you have to do it really artfully in order to kind of throw us off that emotional cliff, right? And I would not want Deadpool movies to do that. I like that they're a little safe in how they do the drama, by not trying to be like, oh my gosh, you didn't see that emotional gut punch coming. Like, I don't want that from this movie. But I do like that they kind of ride this wave where we know we're going into drama territory. We're going to hang out there for a bit. It's almost like there's this short film in this movie that is layered throughout. And then the trick is, how do we go from insane cartoon into dramatic short film? How do we connect those dots in a way that feels earned? And like I said, it doesn't always. The car scene, I think, is a good example of when it feels like that's the wrong way to do it for me. It's like, either don't do the big dramatic monologue or don't follow it up with a goofy fight. You can do one or the other, or you can even somehow get there by having like a longer beat, and then you really stew in it, and you wonder if they're going to stew in that for a while, and you as the audience are like forced to deal with your feelings, and then they start doing a goofy fight or I don't know, something that maybe like throws you off a little bit or throws you off the scent, but like literally, I'm going to fight you now. It's just like, that's not it. But in general, I do love when movies are able to balance such insanely different tones like this. And I think that for the most part, all three of these movies do it really well.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. I might just piggyback off of that. And, you guys called out, Brian and Ed, the sentimentality of the Deadpool movies, which I did not know existed, and was a pleasant surprise in this movie. And I think that underscores a lesson that I think is just important, of like earnest emotion, characters dealing with real problems. Like, don't skip over that. Like, put as much care into Logan talking to Laura, and she's saying, every one of you is the wrong person, but that's why you're the right person. Like, the things that get at like the core character stuff, figure that stuff out, put it in the movie, and then give it attention and care. Because even in a silly movie where half of the jokes are just people getting impaled in their genitals, you can still have emotional moments and a character choice at the end, like we've been talking about, of like they're going at. I also love that they made like the Spock reference, because it's the Spock Kirk thing.
Yep. Behind the glass.
Yeah, behind the glass. Yeah, and that sacrifice is made. But you can still have a moving character moment that affirms, a statement about life if you put care into those moments, and then go have fun. but like you need both. And if this movie had not had any of that, I do not think I would have enjoyed this movie whatsoever. So kudos to them for going hard in those moments too. Sven, what's your lesson?
I'm going to mention two. One is the fight scene in the bus. That is an Old Boy reference in terms of like how the camera moves. And I learned that you can still do that and it doesn't feel derivative. I thought they did a very well take on that fight scene that deserved the execution of that scene stylistically in that way. So I very much enjoyed that. And the bigger lesson for me is I'm kind of hoping for the Marvel and DC to take up less air in the room so that other films get to be made again. And I think we felt a little bit of that in the previous year where we're like, okay, they're realizing they've come to an end. And I feel like, unfortunately, a little bit, this movie is going to delay this process by quite a bit. I think this movie has proven that you can still pull it off. You can still bring the audience back. You just need really exquisite storytelling or interesting ideas to present to them. You can phone it in, which I feel like the studios have been doing on many of these films, which sort of created that welcome slump that I'm hoping for. And I feel like this film, because of a visionary filmmaker behind it, is like, no, there's still a lot more that can be done with this. And so I'm worried about what's going to come because of this film.
Yeah.
But I wish them well.
Do you, though? Do you? Ed, take us home.
I can go. Well, my biggest lesson is that I need to get shredded. I need abs. Clearly, that's like how you solve all problems, is just being really, really ripped. Yeah. No, there's a lot of lessons that I took away from this film. I think to your point about the fight, one thing that I really liked about the movie is that it really stuck to its rules. You know, like Deadpools have a healing factor and there's this whole fight. And I was sitting there like, why does this matter? Like, they will all regenerate. And if they don't, like, it wouldn't make any sense. But they stuck to it. And, you know, they found a creative way out of it while still giving people what they want. I think that's my other big lesson, is that I think, you know, people like us who think about movies a lot get really bogged down in character and story structure and making sure everything makes sense and things are set up. And so when there's a callback, it all tracks. But in talking to people about this movie, the one thing that everybody has said, every single person that I've talked to has enjoyed this movie, they've all said, they started by saying, I had fun. It was a fun movie. Yeah. And that was all that it needed to be. So, like, even if, you know, you kind of have to go, like, you got to not think too hard about the plot or, like, you know, everything making sense all the time, or, you know, maybe you didn't get the things that you wanted in the way that you wanted. I think you can tell that there is a lot of love put into it. There is a lot of sentimentality put into it. They knew what the fans wanted, and they pulled it off. They did a really good job at like pulling it off. Everybody came away really happy, and it was fun. And it doesn't matter if it's not the best Marvel movie, even though it's the only Marvel movie that's coming out this year, because what people are going to remember is that it was fun. So I will try to remind myself of that whenever I'm, you know, getting angry about not breaking a story in the right way, is that, you know, as long as you can make sure that people enjoy the ride, that's just as, if not more important than the ride being structurally sound and making sense.
Yeah. It's a very good lesson. It's one I also have to remind myself of a lot. Alex Kayara is one of our other co-hosts who's kind of my creative partner. He's really good at reminding me of that sometimes. Like when we make movies, I'm like, okay, but this shot has to be perfect and like a millimeter this way. And okay, now it's perfectly symmetrical. And like David Fincher would be proud. And he's like, but is it fun? Like, are people going to enjoy watch? Because at the end of the day, people need to enjoy the thing. It's like, that's true. That's right. Like, we're here to enjoy a thing, experience a story, be moved, and be happy that we watched it. And this movie does that, for sure. Awesome. Well, what else have you guys been watching? Maybe I'll just continue the same order. So, Brian, what have you been watching recently?
Well, appropriately, I have very recently watched a superhero comedy series called Extraordinary. which is a British show, and you can find it on Hulu. And it takes place in a world where everyone gets a superpower when they're 18, with the exception of the main character, who is 25, and she does not have her superpower yet. And she's like a bit of a mess, and her friends are a bit of a mess. And not many people know this show, but You're the Worst was an FX show that I really liked, and it feels like if You're the Worst took place in this universe. And speaking of BoJack, Michael, you'll appreciate there's the way BoJack is just like in the establishing shots. There's like some story world joke going on, or there's like several. There's always just like a superhero is like, helping someone with their shopping across a building or whatever it is. Just like all these like dumb little things that like, oh, that's the tedious task that you had to do, like a Flintstones, dishwasher or something. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. And it also does exactly the thing that I was talking about in my lesson, where it's an insane, over-the-top humor show. And yet it finds those ways to just kind of pull the emotional rug out from you and do those things where it's like, oh, we're actually going to now spend a little time and care about the characters and care about things. And then we're going to go back to like goofy, jokey world. And to your lesson, Ed, it's really fun. Like, it's just a really enjoyable, fun show to watch. So it's 2 seasons in, and I'm very excited for the third, which probably won't come out for a while, but be there when it does.
Nice. Very cool. I'll jump in really quick and say that I've been watching Slow Horses on Apple TV, which I had not heard of whatsoever. And then someone at work mentioned it to me. And so I was like, all right, yeah, let's watch it. And so it's a British spy thriller. And it has a pretty cool cast. Like Gary Oldman's in it, Kristen Scott Thomas, what's her name? Olivia Cook from House of the Dragon is in it. So like really good performances. I watched the first episode and was like a little apprehensive because I was like, I don't know, Apple TV can be hit or miss for me. But I got like sucked in. It's just like a well executed, fun. I love spy things. And so it's a cool modern take on spy drama stuff set in London. And I'm only a couple episodes in, but I'm pretty hooked and I'm enjoying myself a lot. So Slow Horses on Apple TV. Sven, what have you been watching recently?
I've seen a lot of movies this year for the first time again after quite a while. We went to the theater, but nothing really stood out. And like, I have to go back to Oppenheimer to be like, oh, this was really worth it. But there's a show on TV, and it's probably been around for quite a while, that really left a mark on me. It's called Jury Duty. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but it's like a mix of a mockumentary / reality show where the main character doesn't know that he's in a fake jury, and everybody around him is just screwing with him,
including James Marsden as himself.
James Marsden as the backup.
That sounds so stressful.
Juror. And it's incredible. It's a one-off. They can't do it again because people know now about it. But I highly recommend watching that show. It's every episode. You're like, this is incredible. So
nice.
That would be my recommendation.
Cool. All right. And Ed, what about you?
Yeah. I recently saw this movie on Peacock, a streaming service which I don't know how many people have, but I believe it was like a Peacock original movie called If You Were the Last. Has Anthony Mackie of Captain America fame. And I'm blanking on the name of the actress, but she's incredible. She was in that other Apple TV show, which I'm also blanking. But anyways, it's about these 2 astronauts who get stranded in space. Like their navigation fails, their communication fails, but they have like a farm and, clean drinking water for eternity. And like they can survive. It's not a death sentence, but they're sort of just, in this weird space where they don't know what they should do. And it's really fun. And I would say it's a romantic comedy. It's a lot of like, will they, won't they, because they're the last 2 people that they know. And then shenanigans ensue. It like took me by surprise. It was way more fun than I was expecting. And it was way more sentimental than I was expecting. And it was definitely the last movie, besides Deadpool and Wolverine, that had a big impact on me.
Nice. That sounds really interesting. Very cool. Awesome. Okay. Well, this has been our conversation about Deadpool and Wolverine. Sven, Ed, thank you guys so much for joining. This was really fun. This is exactly the kind of conversation I was hoping for. It's like a surprisingly like analytical, deep like conversation about Deadpool and Wolverine. This is super fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I was really excited to talk about this, and I think that we covered a lot of good stuff. And remember to have fun. That's what it's all about.
Exactly.
Same here. Thank you for having me watch this movie right away and sort of feel like I'm actually up to date with what's going on in the world.
You're part of popular culture in the comic book world, anyway. Where can people find you guys online and follow you? Sven, where can people follow you?
I would say on YouTube, This Guy Edits. If you're really into editing, go to secreteditinghacks.com. There's like a free lesson about the number one thing you should do as an editor to improve your editing by like do this one thing and you're gonna get so much 70% increase in your editing skill.
Nice. Awesome. And Ed, what about you?
Awesome. Yeah. Well, if you're interested in explainer videos, you can search Edward Vega Vox on YouTube and all of my videos will pop up. Besides that, I'm, working on some short film ideas in the background, thinking of kicking around different things. So stay tuned. Search Ed Vega on YouTube and hopefully soon more interesting things will be there.
Nice. Very cool.
Highly recommend both their channels.
Yes.
And I, of course, am at Flat Earth Bry on social and talk to you there.
Yeah, it's not true. Yeah, both you guys' channels are amazing. I love your guys' work. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a lot of fun. We want to say thank you, as always, to our patrons that make this show possible. Thank you to our producer, Vince Major. Thank you to our editor, Mike Wuerth, and the whole Nebula Studios team. We will see you sort of next week for an episode from the Vault, our episode on Avatar, The Way of Water. What an interesting sequel that was. And then we will be back for Alien 3. So we will see you next week. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.